Self-despisement. That is the moniker of today. The person who literally bets the family farm on a meme coin, taking out a long or short position, reaching such a state of self um, hatred that it doesn't matter what the stakes are. They've already experienced the most depraved and the most the lowest versions of themselves that they can't stand, and they have to be someone else. They have to be something else, and they think that they're reaching toward this higher state or stature, but they're approaching it existentially because the value system is outside of them, and therefore outside their control. People want control, control, control. And they think in their little plebeian minds that if they assault, gaslight, the utilization of an ongoing Stockholm perpetration stalker system of molestation psychologically, going about their own psi operation, that if they can learn this from books, Machiavelli and alluding to Camus and Jungian philosophical patterns leading into neurolinguistic programming, and combining these things, that they have somehow attained a certain higher form of status, and now they sit on this populist tier. And that's not what's happening. You just have people who are playing into the psyop, which are creating more entropy, more chaos, and more disorder that leads to emotional cathartic impulse buying and more accretion and attrition and all the other things that happen on a scalar wave, right? That you could look at as a simple chart graph, and see the number of deaths, the number of lives, and the acquisition of energies by way of labor. And there's really only two ways that this, the postulation of this thing can go. Here I am watching and waiting, because the little bit of time that I took away not looking, I've lost thousands. Lost meaning that I wasn't articulating and selling at the right time. Everything that goes up must come down, and there's nothing in the cryptocurrency world or anything else. And if there's one takeaway, that is, there is nothing that could be held in such esteem as to say that this is unique, this is special, this is perfect. As soon as Bitcoin hits the skids and goes down in value, and people no longer value it, it was nothing at all. It was a transient, illusory aspect of the. It was mostly fantasy and a projection of value and valuation. Whereas they say the tangibility of precious metals isn't that, because even in the harshest times, things still need to be crafted and made out of precious metals. And so now there's a push toward technology that can produce diamonds, in a matter of weeks, that can produce gold through alchemy. Yes, this is a thing that can produce superior conductivity, using just a fraction of copper or silver or other, colloidal type elements, minerals that are leading into a very organic process with this machine, with a blood flow, with a plasma, with a mind that really is this life support system of these NHI, what they call this experience. But there's really only two probabilities here. You hear all these different wild theories, right? Everything from time travelers to aliens and many other more esoteric and darker themes. But the holographic universe keeps coming back up, and that is at its essence, there has to be a processor, there has to be not necessarily a main hub, but a main set of principles that are shared in the field that create this holographic aspect. In other words, it's being heavily monitored. It's being this principal protocol is being existentially cast back out by under the guise of certain rules of engagement that go beyond a sort of master morality, but master morality is required in the mouse utopia to get an actionable deed or entropy to be kicked up so that it can be become a tangible, tradable aspect, i.e., labor and the production of goods and services. Or the other thing that could be happening is that it is a spiritual theme, and this, eschatology and ontological reach, and that's really, people want to remove ontological thought processes, doxastic valuations from a religious heresy, from a dogma, but in truth, you'd have to postulate these placards, these placings of this is God, these are angels, this is Jesus, these are disciples, this is the devil, these are demons. Doing a certain, as I've mentioned, neurolinguistic existential programming or play, Nete quae severius extra, do not seek yourself outside yourself, right? And we have to look at this as what if it's just a matter of time? What if whatever is seemingly messing with us, right, isn't doing this through the slow, arduous, agonizing process of this pernicious element, right? Over a 75-year period, something has been stalking you and messing with every attribute that was given to you, and this unseen force gave this to you. That is the date you were born, the sign you were born under, the family you were born in this tapestry that just bends the mind and that we're all sort of aware of. Well, what if this was an interplay that happened in the entities, the consciousness, time, quantum scale, right? Where in our view, things are going by through this whole chronobiological Zeitgeber process of a unit of time and measure, that we have this sort of nuclear clock, atomic clock, if you will, but it's based on the micro generation and degeneration on a micron scale, right? And we're looking really at scalar waves, right? We're looking at a patternization where frequency meets sound and there's a canceling out, right? And you can't remove the electron process or the postulations of a fifth force, that time itself can be frozen. If an electron can be frozen, then time itself is a singular unit of measure. And this gets back into postulations of what does that look like, the monad, right? And what's more real, our visualization of homunculus or an atom or a Zeitgeber or a monad, right? Or even a Merkaba, right? Something that can functionally control or process the machine. And perhaps this sort of mirroring and chiral projection that creates this systemic ignition to the entire field process occurs at a certain specific junction point, right? More so than there being a uniqueness with the master, like in a chain. You know, you have the master in a chain, and you have to find that in order to break it off, do your repairs, make sure that it's secured, put it back on, and as the chain is moving, you'd never even notice it. So you're essentially looking for a master key. You know, Charles F. Haanel, a high level Mason. Some say that the basis to the secret, and it gets back into this psi operation of Minecraft, right? But what if that is moving ultra fast on this entities, through this entities, the scope of this entities vision, and it could be attributed to an NFT or a computerized game or a process that's just occurring, a transactional process, and we just think that we're alive and involved because the entire system that we cannot see is brimming with life, because there are these different tiered aspects of absolute zero. So you kind of look at where is absolute zero as the main missing gravitational orbital Dyson sphere, if you will, and you're looking for absolute zero. And so you start to realize that there's this this quadrant or zone patternization, right, of different gas solutions, but different circular, and then you get past the two-dimensional and you start to think in a spherical sense. And when you look at the planets, you see that occurring. You see, you know, higher deposits of hydrogen, helium, you know, when you get into oxygen and carbon dioxide, and then other agents like carbon monoxide, and even you know, who was it? Michael Wheeler. The whole thing with phosgene and the weirdness with phosgene, that it went from a bioweapons manual weapon of mass destruction to nothing but the byproduct of fertilizer. You have to start wondering about these things, but then you get into these elements like moscovium that theoretically, if they were spun fast enough, like the Diglok or the Digloken, the Nazi bell, you have these interlocking magneto chambers of high spin velocity, right? One quadrant or zone after the other. And what you'd see from the outside is you would see this sphere. Everything would turn into a sphere. You spin anything in this room fast enough and it'll hit every single point, right? It'll go through its revolution. And once, if you spun it fast enough, by the time it stopped, it would retain that shape or that form, right? And so you're talking about a multifarious process that involves, you know, it involves a certain amount of mass. It involves a certain gas solution. There has to be constants, or the shift becomes an alchemical process of dilution, or the transmutation from one element into the other. Well, what if you had an element that seemingly like moscovium appeared to be predominantly, you know, say nickel or whatever element it seems to have as its greatest form or attribution, and you spin it fast enough, you spin it within a certain gas solution, um, and you watch how it seems to transcend its location, and you do that in another location, you know, where you're supporting the same identical field, and now you have a direct tether or direct communication between 2 points where the two forms on an atomic scale with the Moscovium never needed to actually go through any sort of coupling process. They are behaving the same. Birds of a feather flock together, right? So you have something where there's a multi-tiered system, and it leads you back to like what's the main crux, right? What's at the core of this? And it leads you back to a holographic state or a holographic universe, right? So there is an undeniable connection between a sort of spiritualism. And I guess, you start to ask yourself what came first, the chicken or the egg. And in my postulations here, and in the under the direct um, guise of what I just discussed, is you have the sphere, but then you have to have something that spins the sphere. And if you're going about like a big bang or a certain beginning, not to say that this is an original universe or a one-off or a standalone, but to say that this is a phenomenon that occurs um, throughout this throughout the projection of existence. Um, as we like to assert or assume that existence occurs in this sort of internal way, right? And that there's like this sort of blossoming forth in an existential sense where something, a consciousness has to reach out. But what if consciousness was just a byproduct, right? And what if the sphere and every shape that could be hearkened back to the Metatron's cube, where we find all geometrical constants, right? What if that was just a byproduct as well, along with these 5 digits and all items of numeric significance that could be esteemed as a place in time that matches a certain time signature, right? So you really have to even wrap your head around this, you really have to get into phi or phi sequence where you have that 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 140, 4, and so on. You'd really have to get into that and to realize that there's a mathematics occurring, especially in the states of perfection, right? Where something is not only seemingly pleasant from an aesthetic point of view, right? But that it and you got everyone talking, through the Enlightenment era, you got everyone talking about aesthetics, that there has to be a form follows function, function into form basis by which you would measure something's worth, right? So then you get into the 21 million Bitcoin, and you start to see this code, this hash graph, this numeric valuation, where all it is a number system that has not necessarily manifested anything, but because it has gone through the passage of time now, because others have valued it, because it has market controlled a $3 trillion right now asset class, right? And it is an asset class because people are trading it. It's affecting people's lives, and they're exchanging the assets for tangible goods. They're living off of it. But you get into block V that I'm watching right now. By the way, it's just moved, very insignificantly, but there's a bull trap that I've gotten stuck in twice because I took my eye off the ball. I wasn't just blindly staring at the screen all day. And that's why people start to, do spot trades, perpetual trades, taking out longs and shorts, because they want to value their time and do other things. So they just set this computer algorithm to buy or sell, or in some cases, most people do this, manually. But now the whole idea of these AI agents doing it for you is beginning to take over. So you have people who are lazily relying on AI agents for their existential existence, because the AI agent could easily just wipe out every dollar, quite purposefully, or do it on purpose to back you into a corner, so that you had to start, and it knew all the things about you. It knows your chronobiology. It knows how much sleep you had. It knows how your digestive processes are. It knows if your heart rate's up or down. You've given it this type of power. And then you back up and think, this is godlike. When you signed each and every contract that you saw on Meta and Facebook, and now more recently you have Argentina that just came out with a Libra token that's a meme token, a meme coin, right? A coin, because I don't believe there's any other tokenization based on this particular project, Libra. But you literally had a rug pull with the politicians who are heading this up, and they all sold at the top, got all the people into it, and left them with nothing, just like Trump did. So you start to look at the populist movement, and you look at this bold statement of, we have, and therefore we will continue to have, we will tell you sweet words that fleece your ears and make you believe, but in our actions, by their fruits you shall know them. It's like people need to open up their eyes, but they think if they're just as cunning, they have somehow gained entry into this initiate's program, right, of ultra wealth, right? But when it comes down to it, it's only wealth, and wealth can be determined by whatever currency or money system is being held with such regard. And you have to go back and look at, Ingersoll Lockwood's The Last President. It's a very boring read. It's too hyped up. But again, you have this midwit author who probably knew Madison Grant. I couldn't find any connections there, Passing of the Great Race, but Ingersoll Lockwood, I mean, they were both attorneys in New York at the same time. And if you could make that grand connection, it would tell you a lot about the mind. And so that's what's happening. It's about the mind. Like, you have these Vatums through Block V that can basically give up a mind to anything, right? And you have the NFT that can be a convertible. It can be converted into a thinking project that, yes, can potentially communicate with you, telling you its direction and its potentials, which the AI agents can't do yet. They can do that technically. They could have a full-on conversation about projections and what in their ecosystem would be first to go about this play, asking you, would you like me to do this for you? Would you like to how much power and control do you want to give me? And then, you'd basically sign off here by uploading or downloading the AI agent into your own integrated system, and thereby your identity would be traded on the greater commodities market, future commodities market, where you would become a commodity, right? You'd become a meme. All things that you do, like VeChain and others, that will keep a video documentation of the process of who you are, what you are in live status, what's he doing right now, And so what happens is, no human being can keep up with this arduous task that requires so much labor and so much what Elon Musk pretends to be, what he puts out there in limited scope and allows people to absorb a certain mimetic algorithm of numbers of, I recall this person doing this, I recall this person doing this. And then in this tapestry, when you reflect on the person, all you see is this guy's hanging out with his kid in the White House. This guy's the head of SpaceX and doing this, and now his ships are able to redock and saving tons of money. This guy's working with NASA. This guy's creating the next revolutionary car. When at the end of the day, you didn't see the end byproduct, and we were all led to slaughter by an inferior mind that was following an AI protocol from the very beginning. So you have to ask yourself, how long has this been going on? How long has this mind been calling the shots and determining, right? And it does. It gets into these areas where, from a philosophical, from a physics, from a purely scientific aspect that could be called secular, but there's nothing is secular. That's always being influenced by this hierarchy of a thought matrix where you have to have this higher and lower valuation and an imagination to go with it that determines, like Machiavelli determines a status, a tier system of this is more valuable and this is less valuable. When all these valuations have created this mercurial aspect, a cloudy, shady, hazy aspect to what first principles, what really matters and what doesn't. And ultimately, one of the biggest reasons why I felt it so pressing to at least develop the beginning stages of what this would look like was esoteric principles of light. It was to say that there's always going to be this existential pathos, rhetoric, sway, and play with the people. There's always going to be bull traps. There's always going to be the next person who thinks they got it, but really they're just sellouts, and they want to pretend that they sit on this higher tier. And as long as they go about this pretending process, they are playing with the devil. They're pandering to the devil. They are the devil's advocate. And they think that they're going to be able to play on the fringe, right, of this whole thing. And that's what the whole story of Faust was about, and getting into Dante's Inferno and these different layers of consciousness is where how far into this degraded state will you allow this thing to sweep you in? Now you're in a rushing river where not a moment before you were just standing there, watching the ripples and posturing and postulating yourself as if you're some great mind, some great physicist in harmony, and suddenly you don't even know how it happened. Well, that's what's happening with the economic system. That's what's happening with the cryptocurrency market, and by the time it does reach a 10 trillion, 20 trillion, 30 trillion valuation of its total market capitalization, it will become an undeniable river that's going to be sweeping people along. But then you look back throughout history, throughout antiquity, we can only mention the tally stick. We can only mention the bill trade systems that were created off of that. But we know from our current historical data, as far as we can look back, is that, and have an accurate reading, which historically, through a seemingly archaic mechanism, even if you're talking about cuneiform clay ledger systems, there was a very precise detail of keeping all these trades down, more so than you'll even find philosophical or religious notions. You'll see the religions be destroyed because it was the religion's fault, right? The religion made me do it. You'll see the politics, there's this sway from one side to the other, this extremism. Now you're sitting juxtaposed to the monster that created it. But you wanted automation. You wanted an AI agent, and that's in essence what God and the government is. It's to look at this higher power and go, "Oh, I'm just a feeble little human." And at the end of the day, it was the combination and the collection of all those minds through not unification, but sitting in their own hubs as nodes, feeding into a central system that they were swayed by because they really wanted it. This gets back into the whole animalistic side of this thing, not animism, but an animalistic beast base primal sort of way, that you could take the most intellectual person, but all they ever did was put on this conformist act so that they would have enough to buy their own island and pull away. And like a greedy little chipmunk with its cheeks overstuffed with acorns, that thing, like Elon Musk that said, "I'll give you the way. I have the way," or Trump. I mean, anytime you see a false bravado or a gaslight type of, um, manipulation, we're like, I keep bringing this up too often, but at this point it's impossible not to, is that the age of the celebrity, as I title it, is uh, fitting perfectly, snugly, side by side with the mouse utopia and the beautiful ones. And if you look into this, finally, the byproduct was that at the end of all this social manipulation, where all all the thing had, all the rat or the mouse had at the end of this cycle of generation upon generations, was itself, and was to groom itself, and was to beautify itself. All it ever had control of was that. And as long as it was just given what it needed from the outside, food and so forth, all of its cunning instincts would disappear into nothing. And it would live in a state of bliss, but in a paramnesia, if you will, at least from the outside, where it lived in this illusory state of self-importance. And that is what we live in now. We live in that state where everyone thinks they're a celebrity. And really, what's the difference between celebrity and God? And then you have all these gods on this panel. We like to think from this Greco-Roman postulation that all these gods were, we like to depict them in movies, right? That they're sitting side by side together and they're having this conversation. But in point of fact, just like the billionaires and trillionaires that are coming tomorrow, these ultra wealthy people that control the populace, right, would invariably build their own planets and have their own place where they could go through this shared cybernetic confluence, right? This large language model interplay, but then there would be much barred from an opposing race, right? And then you kind of see how races could come to be, how certain ideologies could come into fruition, that it would take generation upon generation of a certain fixation of a going about a process religiously until it became so by rote that the process became ritual. And we look at all these rituals that we go about, in interplay. Form follows function, function into form, and that even time itself, and the effects of melanin and melatonin and serotonin, down into testosterone and estrogen and estradiol and growth hormone. And then it gets into mechanofactors and ghrelin and all these other things that really what we're trying to do is we're trying to hack the system. We're trying to hack the corporeal, temporal, carnal system that is our body, and we want to gain control over it. But there's this strange phenomenon where if you gained control over that, Jesus, the Messiah, if you gained control over that, you would be then linking in God to this higher. It really does bridge toward Neoplatonism and animism and these other conceptual processes where you see a moral code, right? A form of ethics, a first principle protocol that has nothing in common with the slave morality, but it's to this point pure fantasy revelations where you have this depiction of an angel that anatomically makes no sense to us from its aesthetic descriptor. You know, it's got these wings and these eyeballs and right, but what it really describes is this spinning morphological sphere that is consciousness separate from dogma, and that it can be anything that it supposes itself to be. And then you get back to Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil in that first sentence, supposing truth be a woman, and the capricious, fickle aspect to something that presupposes itself in consciousness, sways everything around it to go about believing in that, and it will go to no ends to convince you that this is what I am. I am beautiful. This is the form. And without that worship, without that Baal worship, right? Without that worship of these appendages, right? This is the form. This is the Vitruvian man. This is Jesus. This is Messiah. This is the 5 sequence. This is sensual and sexual beauty from an aesthetic philosophical standpoint, that we have reached this place where we all agree on this. And then you realize through this existential crisis, time immemorial, that it's all been a lie, that it was engineered, that it was fabricated to do exactly this. But what the big lie is I believe, even though I think that the whole direction that this whole Jake Barber, David Grush, Psi Operation is going in, is that slowly, ever so slowly, this disclosure has been pointing to Mindcraft, remote viewing, if you will. If you look at, Joe McGonigal, if you look at Stephen Greer's, Eric Hecker and all these people, episode 66, there's like 3 of those on the Sean Ryan show. If you look at these people, you have to kind of look at the direction of sway that it's pulling you in, and it's pulling you toward a world of Minecraft. It's pulling you toward a war, outright polemics that are a jousting that is not only done through gaslighting mechanisms, all of Trump right now, right? Through this authoritarian degradation of you will do what I say, Mussolini, and I will build up, and there's a lot of progress going on there with that, but it is leading toward this discourse where the Canadians are starting to look really good now. Socialism is starting to look really good to the intellectual, to the people who are sitting back and aren't easily appeased by money trinkets, but many of them are quite comfortable because they're in academia or teaching on some scale or some level, because they understand this higher tier process to instruct, to teach on a higher tier. And once you're protecting and feeling like you're feeling responsible for the lower mind, and all you can do is bring up the lower mind and forcing the lower mind to the pervading lower mind as an ocean of again cathartic emotional buy-ins where they're always buying at the top, losing their ass, and everything's coming right back down, and things are getting worse and worse. And this purposcacious measure is going to be found in the Hyperboreans. It's going to be found in the people of the North. I think there's something really strange about Canada and the Canadian people, and you can see even a similarity with them physically, to where you have to attribute sort of a particular, like that there was some sort of covert housing of a nobility. The only thing that I can think of off the cuff is like Genghis Khan. It's like you see the genetic influence, right? But I'm saying this from a very peaceful philosophical standpoint, where you have this, like, if you're going to say that socialism is communism, that's a pretty big reach, right? You'd get into this long, arduous discourse, getting out books and looking at historicity of, socialism being attempted in many different forms in Africa, you know, and how it failed miserably. So it doesn't work. But the only thing that you can do is start to look at communism, pure Marxist communism in certain areas throughout history, and see the success or failure on that grand scale, and the fact that there didn't need to be a constant feeding in of merits, right, through this meritocracy system, that by way of country and people in the security, and not necessarily the ascension, the idea of an ascension. That's essentially what we live in through this capitalistic meritocracy. Is we already live in, we're living quite comfortably with the Wild West cryptocurrency markets that create so much entropy, right? We already live in that world where we're willing to die on that hill, because there has been so much desperation and degradation occurring, which kind of loops back to the beginning of this meandering conversation with myself, this soliloquy, right? To where I'm not setting out a diatribe against anybody. I'm saying, look at all the variables. Look at this as if it's either an operational or a defunct machine, and look at the components and start working with it, right? Start working with it and start trying to find a way to not go through this false process of, this bull market trap that we get trapped in over and over again. And we trap each other and then sardonically laugh and point at each other. You got taken down only to be taken down yourself. And it's like, what's going on here? To the point where what is held in high esteem is the maintenance and the health of a people, as to produce these philosophical truths that ground us and make us more whole, and that we need to return back to a healthier state. And currently, Kennedy is not doing this. It appears that he's doing this, but you really have to look closely at the vaccinations and the fact that he's in bed with it. And people have this short memory, right? But in that cache of memory, in the coming next 6 months to a year, you really have to look at whether or not this person is a sellout themselves to a system, knowing that I kind of have to follow this whole clandestine World Economic Forum, passing of the Great Race, eugenics tied in with the great work, tied into the Masonic traditions, tied into the Rosicrucians, and thereby when you're going through all these religious practices, and then finally when you get there, past Zionism and all this other the Khazarian mafia, going past the Pharisees, And in the center of it, all you see is the Dionysian worship and the thelemic practices of something where you're right back at the beginning, you're right back at the start. And that is the type of loop, that this endless, maddening loop that this consciousness has us all stuck in and under. And self-development is the target. It is the target. Self-ascension and self-entitlement, right? It's only a negative byproduct of this entitlement when you go into the existential and try to gain power over other people. And eventually, if we really are evolved to the point where we are self-sufficient, we have reached equilibrium in ourselves, we're going to see anyone and anything that tries to proclaim a physical existential power over us as a direct threat.